$13 billion. Sit with that number for a second. That's the size of an entire small country's budget. It's enough to build thousands of hospitals and schools or feed millions of hungry people. So what did America decide to do with it instead? They poured that entire sum into 100,000 tons of cold steel and dropped it in the middle of the ocean. Welcome to the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most expensive, the largest, and the most argued about warship in history. Some people call it the greatest feat of engineering this century has produced, an unbreakable fortress, the fist of God built to defend freedom. But to a lot of others, maybe you included, it looks like a colossal waste of money. A giant sitting duck, just waiting for a $5 million hypersonic missile to rip it apart. Why would anyone build a target this big in an age of drones and precision-guided weapons? Did the U.S. Navy just make the mistake of the century? Or is this beast hiding claws none of us know about yet? Today, we're digging for the truth behind that thick armor. The truth about the brutal shock trials it survived, and finally, an answer to the real question. Is that $13 billion price tag a floating coffin, or is it life insurance for the entire world order? If you believe in what technology can do, or you're just curious where your tax dollars actually went, buckle up and drop the word truth in the comments if you're ready to hear the classified side of the story. To understand why people dare call this thing a supercarrier, you have to throw out everything you think you know about ordinary ships. Don't picture a boat. Picture a city, an armored city that just happens to float. Built at Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia, the only place on Earth capable of forging machines like this, the USS Gerald R. Ford wasn't really built in the traditional sense. It was assembled, piece by piece, like the world's heaviest Lego set, except each piece, called a superlift, weighs anywhere from 80 to 900 tons. Over 200 of these massive steel blocks were welded together with millimeter-level precision. What you get in the end is a 100,000-ton behemoth. Let me put that in perspective. It weighs roughly the same as 400 Statues of Liberty combined, or 600 Boeing 747s crammed into a single solid slab of steel over 1,000 feet long. Stand it on its end, and it would tower over the Eiffel Tower. And I know what you're thinking. Something this massive has to be an easy target, right? Fair assumption. But look closer. Unlike the legendary Nimitz-class carriers that have been in service since 1975, the Ford isn't just bigger, it's stealthier. The island, essentially the ship's brain, has been moved further back and shrunk down. Why? To cut down its radar signature, and more importantly, to free up the most valuable stretch of real estate on the entire ocean, the flight deck. That 5-acre flight deck isn't just an airstrip, it's a deadly chessboard capable of hosting more than 75 of the most advanced combat aircraft in the world, including the F-35C Lightning II and FA-18 Super Hornets. And here's the real point. The gap between $13 billion warship and scrap metal comes down to how many punches it can throw in a single minute. But size alone doesn't tell the story. What actually makes the Ford so terrifying sits deep below 9 decks, in a place sunlight never reaches. At the heart of this ship are 2 next-generation Bechtel A-1B nuclear reactors. Older generations of reactors basically just boiled water to spin turbines. The Ford's reactors are something else entirely, compact, insanely powerful nuclear plants that pump out 250% more electricity than what the Nimitz class produces. Why would you need that much power just to run air conditioning for 4,500 sailors? You wouldn't. That extra power isn't an accident, it's a calculated bet on the future. The Navy knows the next era of warfare won't run on gunpowder, it'll run on directed energy. Essentially, they've turned this ship into a giant power outlet, ready and waiting for laser weapons and electromagnetic railguns. The exact kind of tech that could one day shoot down the hypersonic missiles everyone's so worried about. The clearest proof of all that electrical muscle is EMALS, the electromagnetic aircraft launch system. A lot of you have pointed out in the comments that this system is unproven and prone to breaking down. Fair criticism, it's had real problems. But look at the physics behind it. For 50 years, we launched planes off carriers using steam catapults, jerky, violent, and hard on the airframes. EMALS changes that completely. It relies on electromagnetic fields, the same basic principle behind maglev trains or the newest roller coasters. The result, it can fling a 30-ton fighter jet from a standstill to 160 mph in just 3 seconds and do it smoothly. On top of that, it doesn't need boilers or fresh water, and it resets faster between launches. That lets the Ford launch aircraft 25% faster than a Nimitz-class carrier. In a real fight, launching faster is often the difference between you surviving and the enemy not. Of course, none of this fancy technology means anything if the ship can't actually take a hit. Plenty of you have asked, where's the proof this thing can survive combat? You want proof? Here it is. In the summer of 2021, the Navy did something that sounds almost reckless. They took this $13 billion ship out to sea and detonated 40,000 pounds of high explosives right next to its hull. It's called a full ship shock trial. The blast was so powerful the U.S. Geological Survey actually picked it up as a 3.9 magnitude earthquake. The point was to find out if the ship would crack apart, whether the welds would fail, the reactors would leak, or the sensitive electronics would fry. A lot of people love to say the bigger they are, the harder they fall, just like the Titanic. But the Titanic sank because of an iceberg. The Ford took the equivalent shockwave of a heavy naval mine detonating against its ribs, 40,000 pounds of explosives, and it stood tall. Not only did it survive, it sailed back to port, went through some minor repairs, and was ready to deploy again. That's what American military steel buys you. That's why it costs what it costs. You're not paying for luxury, you're paying for the ability to survive. And don't let the size fool you either. This 100,000-ton ship can still cruise at over 30 knots, and some veteran sailors have hinted its actual top speed is a lot more terrifying, possibly as high as 60 knots. That number, though, stays classified. Watching it turn is like watching a skyscraper glide across the water. Combine that maneuverability with its layered defenses, and you've got the first line of protection against whatever's lurking beneath the waves. But steel and explosions are only half the story. No matter how advanced it is, a ship is nothing but a dead hunk of metal without a soul behind it. Coming up, we're going inside this forbidden city. We'll meet the 4,500 people betting their lives every single day on the 5 most dangerous acres on the planet. And most importantly, we'll finally answer the toughest question of all. Can any of this actually stop a hypersonic missile from Russia or China? Or is this $13 billion machine about to become the most expensive artificial reef in history? Stick around. Forget the billion-dollar price tag and the giant electromagnets for a second. Strip all of that away, and the USS Gerald R. Ford is just a lifeless chunk of drifting metal. What actually makes it the most frightening weapon on Earth isn't the A-1B reactors, it's the heartbeat of the more than 4,500 human beings living and working inside it. Welcome to the Forbidden City floating somewhere in the middle of the Pacific. A lot of critics argue that $13 billion should go toward housing the homeless. That's a fair humanitarian point. But there's a side of the story that rarely gets mentioned. This ship is also somebody's home, a much harsher one than anything on land for thousands of America's sons and daughters. Who are these people? They're not emotionless machines built for war. Most of them are 19 or 20 years old, fresh out of school, who left their families, their partners, and solid ground behind. Out here, privacy simply doesn't exist. It's a luxury nobody gets. Picture sleeping in narrow, stacked bunks that sailors literally nickname coffins. 3 high. Every time an F-35 lands directly above your head, the noise crashes down through the lower decks like Thor slamming a hammer into the ceiling. Getting real sleep on this ship is its own daily battle. Feeding this floating city is just as impressive a feat as launching aircraft. The cooks turn out more than 15,000 meals every single day. The onboard desalination system has to filter hundreds of thousands of gallons of seawater into fresh water, both for showers and to keep the reactors running. And every single day brings its own quiet fight against isolation. No cell service, spotty internet at best, just endless ocean and iron discipline. Why bring all this up? Because next time you hear the number $13 billion, don't just picture dollar signs. Picture the sweat. Picture the quiet sacrifice of those 4,500 crew members. They're the ones guarding our sleep back home, even while they're often losing their own out there. If life below deck is tough, life above deck on that 5-acre flight deck is a whole different kind of brutal. People call it the 5 most dangerous acres in the world, and for good reason. Imagine working in the middle of the busiest airport on the planet, except it's been squeezed down to the size of a football field. Around you, spinning helicopter rotors that can take a limb off in an instant, jet blast powerful enough to knock a grown man clean into the ocean. And steel cables pulled as tight as guitar strings, ready to slice through legs if one snaps. And all of this is happening while the ship is rolling in rough seas, with noise levels hitting 140 decibels, loud enough to blow out your eardrums permanently without protection. And yet, somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, there's a strange kind of beauty to it. The Navy actually calls it the ballet of the flight deck. Radios barely work over the roar of jet engines, so the crew communicates through hand signals and color-coded shirts instead. Yellow shirts direct the chaos and coordinate movement. Red shirts are the ordnance crew, literally handling live bombs. Purple shirts manage fuel. Green shirts handle the launches. One small slip from any of them, a forgotten bolt, a misread signal, and it can turn deadly fast. On the forward, that pressure only gets worse. Thanks to EMALS and the advanced weapons elevators, the sortie rate, how often planes can launch, has jumped 33% compared to the Nimitz class, which means the crew has to move faster and with more precision than ever before. This is really where the $13 billion in technology meets raw human willpower. The machines can launch the jets. But it's still people who decide whether those jets hit their target. Now let's get back to the question everyone actually wants answered, the one that has thousands of people arguing online. Could a hypersonic missile turn the US Ford into a pile of scrap metal in 5 minutes flat? Plenty of people insist it's basically a sitting duck, a $13 billion coffin waiting to happen. And here's the honest truth. Yes, hypersonic missiles from Russia and China are a genuine threat. They travel 5 to 10 times the speed of sound and follow unpredictable flight paths. But if you think the Navy spent $13 billion without factoring that in, you're seriously mistaken. First fact, a carrier never sails alone. The Ford isn't some lone knight out there, it's the queen bee at the center of a swarm, known as the Carrier Strike Group. Surrounding it at all times are Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and Ticonderoga-class cruisers, ships equipped with some of the most advanced Aegis defense systems on Earth, purpose-built to form an iron dome over the fleet. Beneath the surface, Virginia-class nuclear attack submarines patrol silently, ready to eliminate any threat coming from the deep. Second fact, it's a system built on systems. The Ford itself carries top-secret electronic warfare equipment. Before a missile can even reach the hull, it has to fight through a dense wall of electronic jamming and radar decoys, and if it somehow makes it past that. There's still the Phalanx CIWS, nicknamed R2-D2, a gun capable of firing 4,500 rounds a minute, plus ram missiles. And with a top speed north of 30 knots, the Ford is never sitting still. In the roughly 30 minutes it takes an enemy missile to locate and reach it, the ship could already be hundreds of square miles away in a completely different spot. Finding a needle in a haystack is hard enough. Finding a moving needle that's actively hiding from radar is a whole different level of hard. So is it invincible? No, nothing in war ever really is. But sinking it would cost an enemy so much that they might never actually be willing to pull the trigger. That right there is the entire point of deterrence. Finally, let's talk about that $13 billion price tag one more time. I know plenty of people will ask, why not spend that on hospitals? Why not help people who are struggling? Those are completely valid questions. But zoom out for a second. An aircraft carrier isn't just a weapon, it's 4.5 acres of mobile, sovereign American territory. It's arguably the most powerful diplomatic tool any president has at their disposal. When disaster strikes, a tsunami in Asia, an earthquake in Haiti, who usually shows up first? More often than not, it's the U.S. Navy, and it's these carriers leading the response. Why? Because they've got nuclear reactors to generate power, desalination plants for clean drinking water, field hospitals on board, and a massive fleet of helicopters that can reach places trucks simply can't. In moments like that, the Ford isn't playing the role of the Grim Reaper, it's acting as a guardian angel. And here's the bigger point. What's actually more expensive than $13 billion? A world war. Having these ships stationed along the world's key shipping lanes helps keep global trade flowing. They send a clear message to anyone thinking about upending the current world order: don't try it, the cost will be too high. If the Ford's presence alone can delay or prevent a war from breaking out for even one extra day, then that $13 billion might be the best deal in modern history. USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN 78. A controversial engineering marvel. America's $13 billion gamble. It could end up as a target for hypersonic missiles, or it could turn out to be the only thing standing between order and collapse when things fall apart. But whether you love it or can't stand it, one thing's undeniable: it represents the peak of human ambition. The drive to conquer the ocean. The drive to build shields strong enough to protect what we care about. Machines become outdated. Missiles get faster. But the spirit of the sailors who run this ship, the ones staying up tonight somewhere in the pitch-black ocean, that never changes. So now that you've gone deep inside this beast with me, has your opinion shifted at all? Is the USS Ford an oversized target waiting to happen, or the undisputed king of the seven seas? Thousands of people are already arguing about it in the comments, and I want to hear where you land. Drop your thoughts below. If you respect the sacrifice these sailors make, hit like. And if you want us to crack open the next classified military file, hit subscribe and turn on notifications.